So I was watching Kwame Brown's live stream today, and he had a special guest, Judge Joe Brown. And what do you think Judge Joe Brown had to say about President Biden? Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. So for those of you that don't know, Kwame Brown, former NBA player, who has been having arguments, debates with individuals who have spent years, decades, calling him a bum, a bust, and basically just disrespecting him because they felt he didn't do the numbers he was supposed to do while he was in the NBA. And we'll get to that in another episode. I'll get back to that in another episode. But I really want to talk about Judge Joe Brown because Judge Joe Brown showed up on the show and they had a good talk. And, and I'll leave a description, a link in the description so you can actually check out the entire live stream. But I wanted to talk about something that I heard during this live stream that specifically just made me say, yes. And so, yeah, it was a really good live stream, but like the point that really got to me was when they started talking about the political system. So now if you're not familiar with Kwame Brown, and a lot of people don't realize this about Kwame Brown, because he's had this channel and he actually, it appears that he voted for Donald Trump. It appears that he supported Donald Trump, but he was criticizing people who were criticizing Trump supporters with no information. So there were things he would talk about. And he would actually say, hey, like people don't realize, like Joe Biden, and he would bring up the '94 crime bill, which was one of the biggest targets on Joe Biden's presidency. And it's really why it boggles the mind why, especially in 2020, when you have the George Floyd protests and riots going on, criminal justice is like front and center, and the Democratic Party chooses Joe Biden to be their nominee. And that, make no mistake about it, they chose him. But that's why it was so critical to talk about things like the '94 crime bill and the absolute detrimental, how much damage it did to the black community. Judge Joe Brown was not going to hold back, and he didn't, because one of the things he talked about was, okay, I'm not some super big Trump supporter, so there's and if you're watching this, you may be a Trump supporter. Let me tell you from my perspective. I've seen, from my perspective, people who are saying I'm an absolute Trump supporter and I agree with everything Trump says, and if you try to criticize anything Trump says, they get mad at you and they call you names, and I'm like, listen, it shouldn't be that serious, especially if you can disagree with somebody on certain issues and still support their policies. And there are some people who I've had discussions with who say, I like this and this about him, but not this. And same thing with people on the left. There are people who are acting like Joe Biden is the savior of humanity. And, it's like anything he does, anything you criticize about him, they will just go off on tangents and rants and rave. And it shouldn't be that way. But I like the way that Joe Brown approached it. He says, listen, I wasn't some huge Trump supporter. I'm not particularly in his corner, but I'm not some guy that's always attacking him either. He saw it, because people talked about Trump derangement syndrome. And listen, don't get offended, but listen, there was two types. There was a Trump derangement syndrome of people who wanted to, anything Trump did. Oh no, look, Trump tied his shoes. Did you see that? Trump tied his shoes. How can he tie his shoes at a time like this? What's wrong with him? This is, that's beneath the office of the presidency. Trump tied his shoes. It was ridiculous to the point where anything he did, there was a segment of the population that just lost their mind. Anything he did, and that was ridiculous. And so that's one of the segments of the population that he was, Judge Joe Brown said, no, I wasn't on that. I'm not just going to absolutely just lose my mind everything he does and just always criticizing him, and just where he became the center of people's universes. And not just people that supported him, people that hated him, allowed him to just take up all of this space inside their heads. But Judge Joe Brown then decided to say, well, don't get it twisted. Let me tell you who I didn't vote for.
Now, I don't particularly like Trump, but I'm not against him. I did not vote for that damn fool that they had running against him, that racist dog, what I heard the first time in 1972 when I was doing an intern thing at a DC think tank, when he was out there with James O. Eastland, John B. Stennis, Faubus came in from Arkansas. That's the fool who said they'd never integrate the Little Rock High School. They had Wallace there, who was wheeled in, and they had Byrd, former Grand Dragon of the Klan, and they were talking about this young man who had a stupid looking ducktail like he was back in the 1950s, was the last true yellow dog Dixiecrat. And they were talking about Joe Biden, who got up there, and when the speech he gave, I mean, I was really offended. I heard it right outside the state capitol building in Dover, which was a rundown, ransacked old house, 250 years old. And he said, Negro children are like roaches. If they're allowed to integrate the schools, they will infest them and they will never be gotten out. Negro.
Who said that? Joe Biden said that?
Yeah, I heard it.
Wow.
Saw him. He said Negroes were animals and they turned the streets into jungles. And he and Senator Eastland had a plan where they could put all of these Negro animals in zoos. Now, we talk about the 94 crime bill. That wasn't shit. The 91 was bad. The
91
87 was really bad. The 81 was the one where one rock got you 5 years, which due to some other stuff Biden and Stennis and Eastland did. It wasn't 5 years with parole. They abolished federal parole. So you get 5 years, you get 60 months, and you get released with all good and honor time at 56 months from federal custody. And then that was the 81 when then there was a 79 and the 77. So let's give blame where blame is due. That bastard has been a racist dog, and he used to talk about he understood the Negro because he was raised in Delaware.
I didn't vote for that racist. And he started unloading on Joe Biden, which I was like, wow, interesting. Because he took it back to the 70s. He talked about him going and hearing Biden give a speech where Biden is basically on some Dixiecrat nonsense. And if you don't know what the Dixiecrats were Democrats, but like that embraced their racism, embraced their anti-blackness, and the Democratic Party tried to pretend that Dixiecrat was something other than Democrat. So that's why like they came up with the name Dixiecrats. Like no, they're Democrats, but Democrats were trying to distance themselves from that image. But yeah, Joe Brown started talking about how he heard this speech of his and like live, not on TV. This was in the 70s. And he was like, this racist piece of garbage. And so he says, and that's just the half of it. Because at this point, I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, I've heard he had said some things in the past. I wasn't there. But I was like saying to myself, but I think his policies are much more significant. Joe Brown did not disappoint. Judge Joe Brown did not disappoint, because then he says, but what's even worse is the things he did. So the things he said was bad, but the things he did. So people talk about the 94 crime bill, and yeah, that was horrible. But that wasn't the half of it. And that's when he got my attention, because I've long said this. I mean, like in the debates, and I actually criticized Trump about this. I says, Trump kept talking about the 94 crime bill, but he didn't talk about the rest of Joe Biden's horrible criminal justice history. Like Joe Biden has just the legislative record of Joe Biden is just like a Uzi on the black community, just destroying, just has wreaked havoc on the black community. And I'm like, and like nobody was talking about it, because there's so much other legislation besides the 94 crime bill that Joe Biden, just destroyed, and he knew what he was doing. But Judge Joe Brown, just like that was not even the half of it. He gets into the crack law. The crack law. Okay, so if you don't know, there was in 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. Joe Biden was one of the proponents, advocates for. I think he even co-authored this bill, because some of these bills he's co-authored, some of them he was just pushing for. I believe this was one of the ones he actually co-authored. And one of the things it did was it increased the penalty, the sentencing punishment for crack cocaine. So now here's what it did. It increased the penalty of crack cocaine so that it was 100 times worse than cocaine. So if you got caught with an amount of cocaine, if you got caught with an amount of crack, it was treated as if you were caught with 100 times more cocaine. So 1 gram of crack was treated like 100 grams of cocaine. This is the law. It's called the and so if you ever hear anybody talk about the 100 to 1, that's what they're talking about. The 100 to 1 ratio, where Joe Biden now created that they could treat somebody who was caught with 1 gram of crack cocaine as if they had 100 grams of cocaine. So like it was just ridiculously punitive. And guess who they targeted with the crack law? Guess who were the people that was being sent to prison, to federal prison, in just football numbers, just record-breaking numbers? That's where mass incarceration came from. So people will try to say that, oh, the 94 crime bill, oh, the prison population was already increasing because of that law. Well, that was one of the laws. But Joe Biden hit it on the head, and I was like, yes. Yeah, and it makes sense. He's a judge, lawyer. This dude knows the law. So this dude was familiar, and he actually knows the background of why Joe Biden is such a horrible piece of garbage. But there's more. He then talked about Joe Biden ending federal parole. See, a lot of people aren't familiar with the 1984 Comprehensive Crime Control Act. But that was the law where they changed the sentencing structure of the federal criminal justice system. And one of the things they did was ended parole. So while people at one time had an opportunity, and look at the timing, and look at how they did this. So in 1984, they decided we're ending parole. And so now that instead of being able to get out in 65%, federal prisoners have to serve a minimum of 85% of their sentences. A minimum of 85% of their sentences, and quite frankly, quite possibly 100% of their sentences. Next, that's in 84. Next, in 86, they drastically increased the penalty for a certain type of drug that they can selectively prosecute. That they then, in fact, do selectively prosecute and use it to fill up federal prisons with black and brown men. But I was like, when Joe Brown talked about that, when Judge Brown hit it on the head about what Joe Biden did beyond the 94 crime bill, because that's surface level stuff and it's easy to say it. And a bunch of the people that will criticize the 94 crime bill don't know what was actually in it, can't tell you why it was bad, and don't even just necessarily disagree with the stuff that was in it. And they can't even tell you the name of the bill. But Joe Brown actually hit specific other policies and other legislation that Joe Biden was behind, co-authored, and advocated for, pushed to destroy the black community. So like when I heard him do that, I was just like, yes, thank you. Just spit fire. And it's something, and I'm glad, because if you look at this live, he had at least tens of thousands of people. I think there's like 40,000 people watching while I watched that clip live, and by now more people have seen it. So all of these people have just gotten the knowledge, the education that the mainstream media didn't want to talk about. Because they didn't even want to talk about the crime bill, but they damn sure didn't want to talk about the 86 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, and they damn sure did not want to talk about the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984. They damn sure didn't want to talk about any of those. CNN don't want to talk about it. MSNBC definitely doesn't want to talk about it. They want to pretend that this guy is a fucking hero when he's a piece of shit. I hate Joe Biden with a passion, with every fiber of my being, and I was overjoyed that Joe Brown let him have it. Whew. Yes. Okay. So yeah, that was good. And there's plenty more that they talked about. Like I said, they talked for I think about 2 hours. So definitely go. Like I said, the link is in the description. Check out that talk. I'm gonna go watch some more of it because yeah, they talk about a lot. But that was one of the points that was the point that made me stand up and cheer. Thank you for checking out the channel. As always, don't forget to give me the thumbs up, like, share, subscribe if you want to hear more stuff about politics, about social issues, about what's going on, and about stuff that the mainstream media may not want to tell you. In fact, correction, that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk to you. Subscribe to the channel. I got plenty of it. And if you disagree, if you actually like Joe Biden and think that him destroying the lives of black people for decades is a good thing, go ahead and give me the thumbs down, but don't give me a thumbs down and run away. Write why in the comment section, and I'll address it either in the comment section or in a future video. I'll see you next time.